Welcome to the Sisterhood Collective podcast, where we empower women to break barriers, overcome limiting beliefs, and achieve true success. I'm your host, Laurie Drummond, entrepreneur and founder of 5 successful businesses. Join me as I share proven strategies, interview inspirational leaders, and provide behind-the-scenes insights to help you level up in your business, career, and in life. Because together, we can get further faster. Okay, let's dive in. I'm sure you've all seen the quote we shared from Brené Brown a few weeks ago on our Instagram page. What she says in there is, don't go looking for evidence that you don't belong or that you're not enough, because you'll find it. I know who I am, and if I try to change it to appease you, I might be fitting in for you, but I'm no longer fitting in for me. And that's a betrayal of who I am. And that's powerful stuff right there. And I'm a big fan of Brené Brown. I've read a lot of her books, and I think we need these reminders sometimes of these, powerful quotes. It gets, becomes thought-provoking. So it did get me thinking, how often are we portraying ourselves in these small, subtle ways? Now, don't get me wrong, sometimes adjusting who we are a bit can be useful. I mean, look, I've done it in many areas of my life. I think back to school days when I'd adjust, depending on which group I kind of wanted to hang out with, just to see where I could fit in, particularly because we traveled a lot when I was younger and I would change schools. And from way back then, I would go to school, meet a few people, see who the cool kids were, or, who was interested in sport, because that's something that I was interested in. And then you've got to try to fit in with those people so you don't feel alone or isolated. So it does really start at a very young age, I think. And then when I was in the army, well, let me tell you a little bit about that. Well, that's a whole nother level of shaping. And it really depended on the situation that I was in at the time. I changed the way that I spoke, to hang out with the boys or be one of the boys, because I didn't want them speaking about me behind my back. Same with when I was talking to the women as well. But also I would, try different sports, or maybe even pick up new interests suddenly because someone else is doing it. So then, you start getting that interest in that new activity, whether it's, maybe it's a sport, maybe it's, playing a musical instrument or going camping or hiking or something like that. Some of it was authentic growth, but some of it was about fitting in. And a lot of that adaptation was actually good for me. Taking on new interests, getting involved in different sports, those things often ended up adding value to my life, even when they weren't exactly my idea in the first place. So it's not about rejecting every influence or insisting we don't bend at all. Just keep that one in mind. But it does become a problem when we adjust who we are just to get a stamp of approval, right? And I think this is something that many of us feel in business too. I mean, if I'm at a networking event or meeting a new client, I'll adjust my energy. Maybe I'm a little bit more reserved, or I'll show empathy if that's what the situation calls for, but I definitely adjust to the situation. And I think, that's probably got a little bit to do with mirroring, which we learn in sales, we learn in what I used to do in my old tradecraft in the military as well. We do it in how we present ourselves, our clothes, our style, even in the brands we align ourselves with. Think about, as a woman, have you bought a name brand, handbag or a pair of shoes or something like that, just because everyone else is doing it and it's something that, you want to do too, to fit in, or not to have people look down at you because you bought these really cool, comfy shoes from Kmart or somewhere else. And I noticed that a lot here in the UAE, because everybody wears brands. And this one time I bought some, what are those shoes with the red heel? Was it the Louboutin shoes? And I'm like all fancy pants, or at least I think I am. And I'm trying to walk in these shoes. And my friend's like, get the taller ones. I'm like, I can't walk in those. And not only that, when I actually go back to reality in Australia, the stems were so small we've got cobblestones, we've got brick pavement or just pavement in general, and the bitumen, there's cracks and things like that. So to walk in those beautiful, really expensive Louboutin shoes, of which, by the way, I couldn't walk in, they kill my feet. There was no point buying the really tall heels to take them back into Australia. But here in the UAE, you drive all the way up to the door and you're walking on tiles. So it's a little bit easier. Anyway, been there, done that, have realized that maybe I bought shoes that were too tight and way too expensive for no real good reason. But we've all done it, I think. And while some of that's healthy, some of it can feel like we're just putting on a mask. Here's a question. Where's the line between positive influence and betraying who we are? That's what I want to explore today, because as much as it is valuable to adapt, it's equally important to be aware of when we're sacrificing our true selves. And I want to unpack that just a little bit, because we need to find the balance. How to know when we're fitting in for growth versus fitting in because of fear or self-doubt. And by the end of this, I hope you'll walk away with a few tools to help you show up as yourself more often, with a little less self-betrayal along the way. So let me first talk about the difference between authenticity and fitting in, because this is a topic that comes up a lot, even for myself. I've noticed that within the sisterhood, there's this powerful unspoken agreement, which is exactly what we wanted. You're here because you want to belong. It's not about changing yourself to fit into someone else's standards or to meet some outside approval. And that's just so rare these days. It's like we have this invisible invitation for each woman who joins to just show up exactly how she is. No need to impress or to prove yourself or even adjust. Just be who you are and you're in. Unfortunately, life's not always like that. For so many of us, we've been fitting into different environments since we were children. And as I said earlier, for me, it started, as far back as I can at least remember, was school. Fitting in was almost survival back then. Maybe you started dressing a certain way or picking up certain interests because you wanted to be part of a certain group. And there's no harm in exploring different parts of yourself, but where it gets tricky is when we start sacrificing our true self. I think back to when I was in the army, fitting in was part of the culture. And so, as I said earlier, I adjusted how I spoke, what I focused on, and even how I carried myself. And it was about proving myself too, all the time. But it served a purpose, sure, at the time. Although over time, you start to wonder, am I doing this because it's true to who I am, or am I doing it because I feel like I have to do this? And if you listen to episode 36, the podcast before this one, where Sam Jackson interviewed me, I think I mentioned in there that when I got out of the army was when I really started to find myself. It was that moment when I suddenly worked out that I could have my own opinion. I didn't have to do what everybody else was telling me to do. And I really started to explore and find out what I truly like, who I want to be, and, started to make a plan to try and get there. Let's also talk a little bit about work, because that's a majority of us are in the workplace. And I know so many of us have felt that pressure to fit in to a certain professional mold. Maybe you're the empathetic one, or you're always the high energy person who brings the vibe to the room. Like, I had a friend invite me out for dinner and say, I'm going out with a really boring person. I really want you to come to, hold the conversation and bring the vibe. And I thought it was kind of a compliment, but also not. Also in business, I often adjust my energy too, because sometimes I need to be that reserved person. Other times I'm all the energy. Like when I used to coach classes, it didn't matter what mood I was in. If I was, cranky, I had my cranky pants on, or if I was a little bit sad, or I was flat and, and lacking energy. As soon as I took the floor to coach the class, it was like this, mask came on, the persona came out, and I was the high energy coach that I needed to be, that people needed me to be. to bring that energy, to get them motivated to, you know, potentially do burpees or something crazy. So I do adjust my energy and my persona, and always have. And it's natural, I think, too. You have to do this to whatever situation or whatever this situation needs. But if you're always shaping yourself based on other people's expectation, we lose ourselves. We lose touch with what we actually bring to the table. And then, of course, there are families and social circles where fitting in can get especially tough. You might find yourself toning down certain parts of who you are just to avoid judgment. And I think a lot of us do that, you know, when you first meet somebody, or maybe you have you know, you're going out with a friend who's bringing another friend and you don't know them too well, or you don't know the group, and you feel this urge to play it cool or go along with the vibe just to keep the peace. And I think we've all been there as well. But trying to shapeshift, even if it means going against what we'd normally say or do, I just don't think every situation warrants that. And I really just wanted to bring it to the table and bring it to your attention and to my attention, because I truly believe that we do have to be authentic, and we should be authentic, and we should be proud of that person. Be proud of who you are. Belonging and fitting in aren't the same. Belonging is saying, this is who I am, and I'm here with people who get me for me. While fitting in means molding ourselves just to find a place in the group. And if we're doing too much of that, it can start to chip away at our confidence and our sense of self. So what's tricky is that fitting in can feel comfortable at first because, let's face it, it's a survival instinct. We're wired to seek connection, and sometimes that feels easier when we adjust who we are. But here's something I would like you to consider. Where in your life are you leaning into belonging versus fitting in? And what might change if you started showing up a little bit more authentically, just as you are? The sisterhood, for me, is a space that welcomes people as they are, which I said earlier. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to have it all figured out. And you certainly don't have to shapeshift to be accepted. And that's what I'm trying to create. That's the kind of belonging we're aiming for here. And I think it's important that we recognize when we're choosing to belong versus when we're trying to fit in, because it's this difference between feeling accepted for who we are versus feeling accepted only when we put on that certain mask. And this is something Lauren and we talk about a lot, even when we, you know, are doing our own, you know, our social media for the Sisterhood Collective too, because we don't want to be influenced in the wrong direction, or to jump on, you know, somebody else's train because that's the latest and greatest and that's the theme. We want to stay authentic to who we are and stay true to our mission. So as you're listening to this, I challenge you to think about what you're still doing just to fit in your life, and ask yourself, is it time to bring a little more authenticity to those areas? Because the people who truly care about you, the ones who are meant to be in your life, are the ones who will welcome you as you are, not as you're pretending to be. Something I told a group of women that I did a speaking event for was, when was the last time you audited your friendship group? Because if you were to sit down now and write down all of the people that are kind of in your circle, and you just, you know, brain dump them all down, jot them down on a piece of paper, and then really look at that piece of paper and go, are they a true friend? Are they allowing me to be me? Do they support me? Is it a give and take type of relationship? Is it a two-way street? Like, just do a little bit of an audit. Are they draining all my energy? And just work out who you should be spending more time with versus who maybe you should be spending a little bit less time with because they are sucking the life out of you, is probably the best way I can put that. So here is a truth. Sometimes choosing yourself and your values over what others expect of you is the most challenging and freeing thing you can do. Let me tell you what that looked like for me. I spent years in the army where I had adjusted myself to fit in and made some great memories, by the way. I will say that. Great friends, great memories, great start for my life. But I also knew there was a point when staying there wasn't what I wanted long term. Mind you, it was a pretty long career anyway. But there was that moment of clarity for me when I knew it was time to go. And almost everybody told me to stay in. But I obviously found a little bit of rebellion in myself, and I did choose to get out, and I left because I wanted more. I wanted something different, and I wanted the freedom to shape my own life. And it didn't stop there. I've left incredibly high-paying jobs, not once, but at least 3 times, and not because I didn't need the money, because I like money, but because those roles just didn't align with my values or the life that I wanted to live. You know, I also worked in Iraq for a few years, and that work was 7 days a week with barely a thought of having time for myself or my loved ones, friends and families back home. You know, I'd sit there dreaming of something as simple as a lazy Sunday breakfast with friends, or taking a, weekend trip away when I wanted to, without having to beg for time off or fit into the schedule. But I just kept telling myself, just keep going. And I did have a goal, and I had a financial goal back then. But I just kept going because I didn't believe I could find a job that respected my time and paid well. So I undervalued myself. Then there was a contract where I was paid even better. You'd think that would be a win because it brought me back to Australia. It paid me more money. But the problem was it came at a huge personal cost. I couldn't go on a planned holiday with my partner. And because of that job denying me that, and honestly, that was it for him. It was the last straw. And he decided that, that was it. So we didn't last. I was devastated at the time. I'd chosen the job and the security over something priceless. So looking back, those roles taught me a lesson that shaped who I am today. My values and my boundaries are everything. My values and my boundaries are everything. And I say that twice because so are yours. These days, I choose my work. I set boundaries. I create my own schedule, and I don't have to apologize for it. Some weeks are flat out and others are relaxed. But you know what? It's my schedule and it's on my terms. And that to me it's my freedom. Knowing I'm showing up for what matters without betraying myself. Here's another story for you, and it's one I don't often share at all. As most of you that have been listening to this podcast for a while, you probably know I've worked in the male-dominated industry, all those fields, for most of my career. And I'd like to say the environment is always respectful, but that hasn't been my experience. I was harassed like many others multiple times, and for years, I stayed quiet. But about 3 years ago, during another contract, I decided enough was enough. When the same thing started happening again, I called it out. I told the person their behavior was unacceptable. And I said that that would be the last time I would accept a contract under these circumstances and where I didn't feel respected. That was another turning point because I finally owned my worth. I realized I didn't have to put up with less than I deserved. And that's another layer of freedom. And by the way, I'm proud of myself for standing up for myself in that moment. Because one of the things that happens there is you fear losing your job and the thoughts of other people as well. Anyway, I was proud of that moment and I've stayed true to that word. So that was another layer of freedom for me, the freedom to choose who and what gets my time and my energy. And I know there are a lot of women and men, you can relate to this feeling. And let me tell you, there's no amount of money or status worth betraying yourself. When you start choosing yourself, choosing the life that fits your values, that's when you start to feel real freedom. So if you're out there now working jobs that take away from who you are or letting things slide that don't really sit well with you, ask yourself, what are you sacrificing and is it worth it? Because every time you choose to stand by what matters to you, you're one step closer to real freedom. This is exactly what we help women with in the Sisterhood Collective. We created the growth room because As I know from my own journey, it takes real work to uncover your values, set boundaries, and make those choices that feel right for you. It's one thing to say you'll live authentically, but it's a whole other journey to actually do it. And that's why we've got the tools in place, the resources, and this incredible community cheering you on. And I'm so excited. We've just launched the Life Reboot course, which takes you through those questions. Who am I? What do I want? And how do I get there? Because they're the exact questions that lead you back to your true self. And it is what I have used for years and years and years to find my way. When I look back and I see that these choices I made weren't about money or status, they were about living authentically, it makes me happy that I've done that. And you know what? Sometimes I don't even sit here and reflect on these things, which I tell everybody else to do all the time. Reflect on the good. This is a good thing, I think. So if you're out there in a job or a relationship where you're sacrificing your values, just ask yourself those questions. But how do we do this? How do we stop trying to fit in and start showing up as our true self? And I know it's easier said than done, like most things that are important, especially when we're so used to adapting to what others expect. But here's a few ways to start recognizing those moments when you're slipping into this fitting in mode. And here are some actions to help you, I guess, stand firm in who you really are. So firstly, define your values. And I say this all the time. Do you know your values? And in fact, I actually did this exercise with my staff here in the UAE. And it was such a good exercise to do for them to understand each other's values, but also to recognize their own. Because I think that's really important if you're creating a team as well. But back to you, take some time to get clear on what's truly important to you. Your values are they are your compass. They keep you pointed in the right direction. And when you know what your values are, it's so much easier to notice when a situation, a job, or even a friendship isn't in alignment. Inside the growth room, we do a lot of work on defining values because this really is the foundation for living authentically. So I suggest you start there and just jot down a few words or phrases that resonate with you and remind yourself of them often. Another action you can take to stay authentic is practicing self-compassion. Sometimes that self-doubt sneaks in and we start second guessing ourselves. And maybe you've noticed this little voice that says, what if they don't like me? Or should I just go along and just, you want to keep the peace, especially if you've been in any sort of abusive relationship like I have, you end up not saying anything at all. But recognize that voice and try to meet it with compassion instead of judgment. It's perfectly normal to want acceptance, but you don't need to change yourself for it. So practice catching those thoughts and instead remind yourself that you are enough as you are. Another action is setting boundaries that feel right for you. One of the simplest yet most powerful steps towards authenticity is learning to set these boundaries. And this could mean saying no when something doesn't feel right, or even just taking a moment to pause before you commit to something. So maybe this week, practice saying no once when you really mean it, or share an opinion you've been holding back. Little by little, these actions build the muscle of standing firm in who you are. Something I think many of us have realized is that our time is super precious and we only have one chance at using our time. It's the one thing we can't get back. We can make more money, but we can't get back time. So who you spend time with, what you're saying yes to, is probably the most decision you're making. Be mindful of that. It's so important. If you want a challenge for this week, which is something every week, if you get our journal, if you're subscribed to a journal, which is just a newsletter or a bit of a blog really, that I send out each week, at the end of it, there's always a weekly challenge just to do something positive. So here's a challenge for you. The next time you feel that little nudge to say yes, just to fit in, try pausing. Ask yourself, Is this really me? Or am I doing this for someone else? And by taking that brief moment of awareness can make all the difference in helping you recognize and choose to stand firm in your own values. And remember, each time you say yes to yourself, you're building a life that's authentically yours. You're saying yes to you. All right, so today I've kind of talked a little bit about authenticity, belonging, and what it really means to live in alignment with our values. And hopefully those action steps give you a place to start, even if it's just noticing where you're compromising yourself or setting that first small boundary. I can't tell you enough how powerful it is to build a life that fits you, not someone else's version of you. So take a moment to ask yourself, where could you choose authenticity over fitting in this week? It could be in the most smallest ways, but those small steps add up. And if you want to share, I would just absolutely love to hear your story. Send me an email. You can DM us on any of the socials. Head over to the Sisterhood Lounge Room, which is our free community, and let us know where you're choosing to stand firm in who you are, because this journey is so much more powerful when we share it together. And I'd love to hear your experiences. So here's to making choices that align with our values, to creating real freedom, and to living a life that's genuinely ours. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you in the next episode. Thank you for joining us on the Sisterhood Collective podcast. Remember to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any upcoming episodes. And if you want to be the first to hear what is new at Sisterhood Collective, you can find out more on our Instagram, or you can sign up to receive our weekly newsletter and let the good times continue to roll. Now it's time to turn your clear vision into bold action. I'm Laurie Drummond, your host, and until next time, keep striving to live that best life. Take care, and we'll see you soon.